Hello, and welcome to the Imposter Syndrome Network Podcast, where everyone belongs, especially if you think you don't. My name is Chris Grundeman, and I'm here with Zoe Rose, our co-host.
Hey.
This is the Dave Temkin episode, and I'm really excited to share it with you. Dave is a seasoned technical executive, a founder, a board member, an investor, and generally a mover and shaker in the digital infrastructure space. Hey, Dave, would you like to introduce yourself to the Imposter Syndrome Network?
Sure. So I'm Dave Temkin. I've been in the infrastructure space for almost my entire career. Started off in helpdesk, but always had a very keen interest in networks, moved my way into networks, and then really kind of expanded that to overall infrastructure, mostly from an internet perspective, but overall technology.
Let's dive right in here. You are an SVP. You're the head of infrastructure and cloud. What does that even mean? Can you fill us in? Maybe describe what you do in 60 seconds or less.
So in 60 seconds or less, what do? I lead a team that has an infrastructure around the world. We've got over 50 points of presence deployed on 5 of 7 continents. We have a team that's also globally spread all over the place, from South America to Australia to Singapore to the UK, and so on and so forth, and a very large team in Israel as well. I'm responsible for leading that team for the uptime and reliability of our service and for ensuring that our customers receive great service worldwide for, basically our 2 main products, which are Cloud WAF, so web application firewall, and DDoS mitigation, so protection against threat actors that attack networks. I have people all over the world who are up at all hours making sure that things continue to hum right along in that infrastructure.
One of the things I think that's really interesting about you, Dave, is just this kind of magnificent career you've been able to build here, right? You built the Open Connect CDN at Netflix. Now you're an advisor to DriveNets and Catchpoint. I'm really interested in what that journey looks like. How do you go from network engineer to seasoned technical executive? How did you do that?
If you had asked me where I would be in 20 years ago, I don't think I would have answered any of this. I don't think anything that I'm involved in here would have necessarily been what I thought my journey was going to be. And I don't see that with an ounce of regret. I've loved every minute of it. Well, most minutes of it. And I really, from high school, pushed into this space. I had a job basically working help desk at a pharmaceutical company when I was 15 years old. I couldn't even drive myself to work. I had to bum a ride from someone else, talk my parents into it. The moment I got a driver's license, I was driving myself to that job. But it really kind of began the process of moving into being interested in and learning more and more about infrastructure. And, it'd be hard to compare the infrastructure of a pharmaceutical company 25 years ago at this point to anything we do today. But I think I learned a lot about how to think about infrastructure, how to build infrastructure, how to work with teams to think about who should do what and how to do it. And, I really was always very interested in not only the actual infrastructure, but the process that went into getting everyone together to build it. And so I think I set myself on a path with help from a lot of people, a few in particular, but in general, a lot of really tolerant people, to get me to a point where I could understand not only the technology, but the business drivers behind it.
Well, the point you touch on is a lot of people helping you along the way. And we've talked about in a couple of different episodes about mentoring and sponsoring. Do you think that played quite a key part to your career and maybe potentially directed you in a different path than you maybe originally thought you would go down?
Absolutely. And I can trace it back for sure, back to teachers in junior high school and high school. I can trace that back to really my second boss, not so much my first boss, who really kind of saw something in me and stuck his neck out for me at that pharmaceutical company I mentioned, which is Bristol Myers Squibb. He took a chance on a 15-year-old to work an internship as a help desk engineer for a job that normally they would have put college sophomores in. And if it wasn't for that, that was really the start that I got. And I think that was the jump off point for a lot of things that I did from there. So I can point very much so at one person in that starting point. Then over the years, for sure, many people that I can think of helped me, put up with my BS, as, Chris, I'm sure, can attest to. Sometimes I'm not always the best person to work with from a communications perspective, and really kind of taught me how to be better in those kinds of ways along that path. And so I would say that without, real mentors, people who had a true interest in seeing me blossom, I definitely would not be where I am today. And I find it so important to pay that forward in my career now, wherever I can.
One thing you mentioned was maybe the skill set that you're not the best at. And that leads to the question of, how did you figure out what you were good at? I imagine a lot of failure, but tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I failed at plenty of things along the way. And I think that learning to own those failures is how I learned to learn from those failures. When I was younger, I think I was much more a know-it-all. I thought that, no one could do something maybe not better than I could, but I knew how to do it. I didn't need to be, I didn't need help. I would just figure it out. And in some amount of fairness to myself, that is part of, I think, what has made me who I am, which is that I am really, really good at just figuring things out. And, the flip side of that is I remember breaking a lot of stuff along the way, tinkering, from my parents' stereo to core router at a major ISP, definitely tinkering with stuff that went south quickly. But without that kind of curiosity and the ability to think about that type of stuff, I don't think that I would have necessarily grown in the ways that I have. And that really kind of extended as I got further along in my career to the more business process stuff. And, the thing that I'm sure maybe we'll talk about at some point here is I didn't go to college. And so I didn't get a lot of those pieces that people would get, even if they went for a comp sci degree or something like that. And that I really had to learn on my own, or I had to read to learn about, or had to, learn from a mentor or something like that, instead of really, having that drilled in, that kind of process method drilled into my brain in school the way that it would for a lot of other people.
As a person that did go to college, but interestingly started as an IT manager out prior to going to college, I'll let you in on a little secret. It doesn't make a difference. I know that a lot of people think a college degree means you know your stuff, or a university degree knows you know your stuff. But I found that actually people that figure out themselves tend to know it a bit better. And it takes college people, including myself, more time to then get into the role and get the hands-on experience. So whilst having that degree is lovely and it does open a lot of doors for a lot of people and gives you the depth more of a vast view versus, because I had to do things that I didn't think I wanted to do. I will say that I know for a lot of people that not having that validation or that piece of paper is scary, but yeah,
it took me a bit to get over that. I'll say I remember, I'm guessing the year was probably 2007, 2008. I remember applying for a job at Google, which back then was, much, much, much smaller company that, I don't know, you could still call them a startup at that point, but they were a lot closer to a startup than what they are today. And I remember going through an interview process, and I remember it going quite well, and then them realizing afterwards that I didn't have a degree, and then getting rejected for it, for that role that I wanted. And it killed me at the time. And I remember, it genuinely gutted me. And even before that, I worked for a few financials before I got into the internet space. And my potential for advancement in those was severely limited by my lack of degree, for sure.
Yeah, so I'd like to dig in there a little bit. I'm a high school dropout with no college diploma. I've done pretty well for myself. I think without college, you've done amazingly for yourself, even quite a bit more success than I've had. And so, I would like to dig into that a little bit about not going to college, and then also the gatekeepers you're bringing up, right? And then getting into a career in tech, and then how those things are related. First off, maybe going all the way back then, if you're comfortable talking about it, why didn't you end up going to college?
Absolutely. So I'm a child of divorce. My parents divorced when I was 16, 17. I'm also a gay male. I was in just, I wouldn't call my childhood, in any way abusive or anything like that. It just was not great. So if I think about my peers, my friends and things like that, I was definitely an introvert. I was a nerd. I was in the closet. There's all these things with parents who are constantly fighting. And there's all these things that just made me want to get the heck out of like where I came from. And so because of that, I really had this drive of like, I need to get out of my parents' house. And, my parents love me. There's no real like driving force. I don't have any like sob story there, but I just felt this sense of like, I need my independence. And I'd always been a very independent kid from, even a much younger age. I kind of just, to my point earlier, wanted to just figure stuff out. Like and thought I could. And so because of that, I really started to try to figure out like, hey, how can I get like a job? And my first job, I was, my first, I don't know, want to call it real job or whatever, however you want to say, I was a busboy at a local restaurant. Lasted like 2 months. It was fine. I did an okay job. I actually made an okay busboy, I think. I can still carry a lot of glasses to tables today. I'm good at that. So definitely, lasting education from that. But I really just wanted to get the heck out of there, and I wanted to get out of high school. Like I hated high school. Just didn't feel like the place for me. I've always had, a touch of ADHD, and it was definitely very much so untreated at that point. And like many people with ADHD, I took tests really well, but I would never do my homework. I just like would literally never do homework. And so because of that, I really did not do very well in high school. And I heard a story shortly after I graduated, which was that my teachers like literally met a couple weeks before graduation and decided to pass me even though I shouldn't have.
Oh, wow.
Mostly based on me never turning in homework. And they did that because they knew, that I was on a decent path and that if they had flunked me out, they would have just completely screwed up that path. So that comes back to, I guess, a little bit to that mentorship idea of like, they weren't directly mentoring me, but they saw a path and wanted to nudge me towards it. So anyway, the point of that being, in that time, I was really active in the bulletin board community, the old BBSs, dial-up days, things like that. And I was good friends with someone who lived nearby who was 4 years older than me, I think. And he had gotten, he was a freshman in college, and he had gotten this internship at Bristol Myers Squibb. And he, the year before. And he apparently did really well and was in really good with his boss and pitched the idea of bringing me in as an intern while I was in my like sophomore year of high school. And this gentleman, Chris Baldwin, to his credit, met with me. I thought it would never go anywhere. And he offered me an internship. And, it was a paid internship. I was like, as a, whatever, I was 15 at the time. It was crazy that I got that. And I did pretty well. I got there. They originally put me on help desk. I was not very good at help desk because I did not really like helping people fix their printers, but I grinned and bared it. And Chris eventually saw that I had a real interest in networks and had me shadow two of the people who were network engineers at the time there. And then school started up again. I got back there. I was miserable, was not doing well. Then they had the idea to send me to tech school for half the day, which is like auto repair and hairdressing and like that type of stuff, not like computer networks. And I remember on my first week there, I got their frame relay circuit to the county up and running so they could get full-time internet access.
Amazing. Yeah.
I got that up and running, not the person who was supposed to be doing it. I don't even know how the hell I figured it out, but I did. And maybe from some of my knowledge of Bristol Myers, actually. And so they're like, why are you here? I explained it. And they're like, you could go get a co-op somewhere and you wouldn't even have to come in here 4 out of 5 days a week. And so I was like, okay. So I think I emailed or called Chris and said, hey, I'd love to figure out if we could do something with this. And Chris stuck his neck out again, as did the person who ran HR for the division, this woman, Lori. And they got me in there as a co-op. And I was literally going to high school for the morning where I'd have to go do like English and phys ed and also an independent study in telecommunications, which was just a total scam to get a course to drive my GPA up, which was conveniently my first period. So I could just show up late every day once I got a car. And so anyway, I ended up then doing that in the morning. And then in the afternoon, I'd drive over to Lawrenceville, New Jersey, which is just outside Princeton, and go work at Bristol Myers. And I'd work from like 1 to 9 p.m. I'd like give them like a full 8-hour shift. And that was paying at the time. I don't remember the exact hourly rate, but the total came out to be like $65,000 a year.
Oh, wow. That's decent for a 15-year-old, huh?
I was at this point, I think I was 16 and a half or 17. I was a junior in high school. They did this for 2 years. And so I'm making like 60 some $1,000s a year as like a 17-year-old. And so, yeah, eventually I get to graduation and, of course I'm not going to go to college. I'm making more than like many college graduates do. And this is, 25 plus years ago. This is really good money. And not only that, I can work more hours. So it's like, I'm giving them 45, 50 hours a week now at whatever that hourly rate was. And I'm really rolling in it. And so, yeah, I had no motivation whatsoever to go to college. There was just not even any discussion of it whatsoever.
Makes sense. Seems like a sound decision, even now with hindsight at this point.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what my career trajectory would have been if I just paused for 4 years.
A lot of debt, I'll say that. I did go to college and I'm still paying it off. And I was in Canada. So,
wow.
It's quite a bit of debt. But 65, that's an impressive, that I didn't make that much for many years. In fact, probably closer to 5 years ago. No, less than that. A couple of years ago, I made less than that.
In fairness, I was a contractor, and so I had no benefits. I had the taxes were very different and stuff like that. But still, it was a lot of money for a 17 and then 18-year-old.
Totally.
So based on that entry point into your career, has that, the knowledge of not going to college or not being in college, you talked about there was some gatekeepers along the way that maybe made it a little bit more difficult here and there. Has that led to your own personal feelings of being an imposter or not belonging, not having that degree or that piece of paper, or has that not been an issue for you?
Oh, 100%. Every meeting I'm in, I'm sitting there, even to this day, I'll sit in a meeting with some really brilliant people. And I remember, for example, my career at Netflix, I'd sit in a room with, people like Reed Hastings and Ted Sarandos and Neil Hunt and Greg Peters. These are brilliant fucking people. Like Greg has a PhD literally in rocket science. And I'd sit there and be like, how could I possibly say something convincing if I disagree with this person that's going to make them believe me, right? This person has literal PhD in rocket science. Like, what am I going to say here that's going to make this? And, I would leave meetings all the time feeling like just absolute, frankly, shit. I would just feel like, wow, I probably completely bombed that. Whatever I said must have just not come out the way I wanted it to come out. And there's no way I made my point. And then, my boss would be like, it was fine. Really, Dave, it was completely fine. Calm down. And so, I think even to this day that colors that. And I'll sit in a room with, people from finance, and I understand corporate finance. I've been in these roles for long enough now that I can build spend plans. I can understand corporate P&L. I can understand all the stuff that goes along with that and really help craft strategies around it. And I still, though, will sit in a room with someone who maybe has a degree in that space and feel like, wow, there's no way I could possibly compete in providing value the way that this other person does. And the thing I'll say is, the thing I've taught myself, sometimes maybe to my detriment, is maybe you feel like you can't, but you should just speak up anyway. And that has taken a lot of work to get me to the point where I'll do that. And that's something I've also, the flip side is I have to temper. I have to play through my head what I'm about to say because I want to make sure it doesn't sound too dumb before it comes out of my mouth. But yeah, 100%.
Oh, I do that. I triple and quadruple check and I write things down and I'm like, does that make sense? So I definitely relate to that. I want to touch on one thing you mentioned earlier was being an introvert. And obviously with all that went on in the last however many couple of years, remote working. I don't know if you're a remote worker naturally or if that was something that was introduced whilst we had other lockdowns. But my question is more, do you think that has helped you be more, not maybe present at work, but more able to speak up because you're also kind of safe behind a computer? Or is it something that you think has been more challenging?
I find it to be the opposite. I do find it to be more challenging. I was never the person who wanted to be in the office, 5 days a week, 10 hours a day or whatever. Even when I worked jobs that were in office, when I was in finance, the earlier days of Netflix, other startups I've worked at before, kind of the collaboration tools that we have today that allow us to work from anywhere, I still always wanted to try to find ways to not necessarily have to sit at a desk all day, every day. And I remember interviewing for roles and asking about that and, in some ways getting laughed at. But now, right, it's table stakes for many people. And the thing is, to your point about, me being an introvert, yeah, I don't always I'm not good at water cooler conversation. I'm not good at just making stuff up to talk about. And, that can come off to some people as being like brusque or uncaring or whatever. And it's really not. It's just like my brain is not necessarily wired like that. And I've spoken with, some super high powered, I'm not going to name names, but billionaire executives who feel the same exact way and have literally had to go to corporate style coaching, which is basically therapy, to get them to know how to have these sorts of interactions, because it's the only way that people will understand that, yeah, in the back of your mind, you are empathetic to them. You do care about them, but it's just not your style to talk in that way. So, the office has always been a challenge for me from that perspective. But at the same time, the thing that I've learned having taken a new role during this last few years, the pandemic, is that building a global team without these in-person touch points sucks. It is really not good. It does not lend itself towards people being empathetic to other people's causes. I find that, as a great example, to be very specific, the company that I work for, Imperva, now has a very large team in Israel, Tel Aviv, and another city called Rehovot. When I started there in May of last year, travel to Israel was still severely restricted. We were not allowed to go there almost under any circumstance. Some of them were allowed to come to the US, but that actually wasn't fully open at that point again either. And so we had a lot of misses in how we communicate with each other in those early months until I finally was able to get on a plane and sit down with them in Israel and realized there was a lot more common ground between us than I think we all thought. And it took a lot of the heat and the pressure out of the situations and the discussions we were having that before were very kind of contentious and were confusing and not really going anywhere. So I, as much as I would prefer to just be like, hey, yeah, I'm working from home. And, the thing I'll be clear about is when I went back to Netflix, which is a whole other story, I was there for 2 years and then quit and then was asked to come back. When I went back, I said, I want to work from home. And I was one of the very first people to ever be allowed to work from home there. So it was important to me. But now I will say, I think, we have to live in a hybrid world. People do need those in-person touch points, even if for introverts like me, it can be a little painful.
I can relate to that as well. I also work at EMEA, so the European region. I work with a lot of people I have never met, and I do find getting that in-person relationship built makes it easier to talk remotely. So I like that hybrid approach as well. I'm hoping to get to all of the locations as well, because that would be nice.
Yeah, I haven't been on a plane yet to our Singapore office. I really need to go. I've got a world clock literally sitting in front of me with the main locations of my team, so I know what time it is in each of the locations. Try to keep that in mind when I'm trying to communicate with people. It's just an interesting dynamic for sure. Chris has seen me speak publicly many times at NANOG and other events. I think that those are hugely important as well, people getting that kind of face time. And again, as an introvert, those are tough for me, but I find them necessary. By the end of a NANOG week, Wednesday afternoon, I go up to my hotel room and stare at the ceiling for a couple hours because it's just exhausting, the amount of interaction that I have with people. I'm actually fine with public speaking. I would rather get up and speak in front of a few thousand people than I would having dinner with a stranger or two strangers, one-on-one or two-on-one.
Me too. And no one can get that. How can you not make a phone call to the bank, but you can stand up and talk to 1,000 people?
Oh, yeah, no. I mean, the phone is the fact that we're in a world I will literally go out of my way to do something digitally that would take me, 10 times as long to do it digitally than as it would to just pick up the phone to resolve whatever the problem is. I hate it.
Well, working in the Netherlands, I have to use Google Translate for everything. And I still prefer to try and understand something that is poorly translated in those situations than just get on the phone and talk to someone, because everybody here speaks English, basically. So I always feel a bit guilty because I don't know the language of the country I live in. But no, I can relate to that. But that point you made about having a clock for all of your locations, for me, I like that because it makes me feel like, you're genuinely caring about the people you're managing. Not that I think that's shocking, but it's important to provide that personal connection and also actively care about, okay, if I'm contacting this person at this time, what time is that to them? And how can I, help them with this conversation? Like I have to talk to somebody that's not in Europe, and I always try to plan around their schedule because it's not nice hours that we have to communicate. So that kind of brings me to the question of, it sounds like you enjoy being a manager, but what are the kind of things that you really like about it, or maybe you love about being a manager or being a leader?
I'm a very results-oriented, results-driven person, and I love leading a team towards whatever those results are. And I tend to, be very humble in a way when it comes to that. I don't take credit for work that my team does. Someone applauds me for doing something that was done by someone on my team. I'm the first person to go, thanks, but it was so-and-so. I really enjoy, coming back to the mentorship aspect that we were talking about earlier. I really enjoy feeling that I'm empowering people to do their best work. And I want to help them get whatever is blocking them from doing that work out of their way. And that's what gives me satisfaction. One of my old bosses said, I'm the best person he's ever seen when it comes to execution. If he needed something done, he came to me. I made sure I got it done. And, that was a coordinated effort. It wasn't that I was, then going and doing someone's job for them. It was, hey, how do I get the right people engaged? How do I, get them interested and to own whatever needs to be done here, and, allow them to really feel that sense of ownership and feel that sense of reward when they do a great job. And that's really what drives me.
That's fantastic. And it's refreshing to hear because, Zoe said, it's not shocking that you care about your people, but it's also not totally far off from shocking, at least based on some of the experiences I've had in the past. I think we're unfortunately running out of time for today. Dave, thank you so much for sharing your story with us and with the Imposter Syndrome Network. And thank you to all of our listeners for your attention and your support. We do have a LinkedIn group for the Imposter Syndrome Network that we'd love for you to join and get or give career advice, mentorship, or just general community support. Now, before we close out, Dave, I'm curious, and I'd like to dive into one more topic with you. The banner on your LinkedIn page says "Be an ally." Can you tell us what that means and how we do it?
Absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a gay man. I came out in my teenage years. The thing that I will say is that I have strived throughout my career, with a few exceptions here and there, to be genuinely who I am, to talk about who, was involved in my home life in the same way that any other person would, talk about my friends and what I did on the weekend without having to be, having to swap pronouns or whatever, covering behavior that people tend to do. And wasn't always easy, especially earlier in my career. And I can tell stories. There's a woman who I work with who I brought with me later on to Netflix, who was one of the very first people I came out to professionally. And I had to do that because she needed someone to cover for me in a very awkward situation that's not really worth getting into on this podcast. But it involved a strip club, and I'll just leave it at that. Not my thing, just to be clear. But she did a good job of helping me out. And I was like, okay, that was a lot easier than I thought that was going to be. But what really became important to me was that representation, because over the years, I've had numerous people come up to me and say, hey, I can't believe that you got up in front of this huge meeting and mentioned your boyfriend or then your husband or whomever, or, whatever other story you told. That is something I could never have imagined doing. And because of that, I think very differently now about, I do want to come out at work. I do want to be my authentic self. And, they spent years in hiding and decided, no, clearly if you can become an executive wherever it was, whether it was Netflix or here at Imperva or even at Yahoo, clearly, if you can be your authentic self and become that executive, I can do that too. And so, I think I'm going to try to live my life a little more authentically. And obviously I'm paraphrasing the numerous different conversations I had, but really, to be gay, to be supportive of someone who is, LGBTQ, whatever in that spectrum, you just need to be understanding and supportive and provide people with a safe space to talk about who they are and who and what is important to them. And, that stretches beyond sexuality, obviously, for a multitude of things. But in general, it's very, very important that people feel like they can bring their authentic selves to work with them, because that's when they do their best work. And, lots of companies talk about all sorts of diversity and inclusion efforts. At the end of the day, that's because that helps them attract and retain talent, right? It's not that they of course everyone wants the world to be better, but, it is also about results for them. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't also be gratified by the fact that, hey, our employer does care and does find this to be an important dynamic of my life and wants to support it. And so being an ally is, wherever you are within that spectrum, making sure that people have the space and the freedom and the security to bring their authentic selves with them to work.
Awesome. Thank you. Are there any projects you're working on or involved in that the network should be aware of? And also, maybe the same answer, how can folks connect with you if they want to chat?
Sure. So I'll be honest, I've taken a big step back from a lot of the projects that I was involved in. I'm much less involved in things like NANOG and Community IX. I am now the president of NINOG, which is the local New York network operators group, which is great if you're in the network or even infrastructure space in the New York metropolitan area. I encourage you to check out ninog.org. Join us at one of our events. We've got a few coming up. And then if you want to get a hold of me, I'm at dtemkin on Twitter. I think same thing on LinkedIn. Always happy to chat, chat work, chat whatever. Feel free to hit me up.
Fantastic. We will see everyone again next week.
Digital threats such as, I don't like this answer at all. I don't like this answer at all. I don't like where I'm going with this.
I relate to you so much right now because I was at a podcast and I had to do 3 takes of one question because I would get halfway through it and be like, that's rubbish. So